positive. So my name is Gonzalo. I'm a professor of sport management at Virginia University in the United States. And I will start, my next slide, let you know where I am located. Okay, so for those of you who perhaps have been in the United States, you can see that New York City is on the east part, right? On the right part of the screen, red, you can see there, right? I am in where you can see that yellow dot. Okay, that is the state of West Virginia, and that is my town. The name of my town is Morgantown. Okay, and that's the home of West Virginia University. Okay, Morgantown is a college town. So basically, we have a large university, we have a university hospital, but there's no more than that. So it's basically a college university. Now, we are 1 hour south of Pittsburgh. Okay, you can see also the arrow very close to Pittsburgh, and we are 3.5 hours west from China. Okay, so we are not in the east coast of the United States. What the topic of my presentation today is about the challenge of developing, policies that you can achieve both high performance sport and at the same time provide opportunities for people to become physically active. What we force in trying to produce high performance athletes, sometimes at the expense of neglecting services for the population. Okay, it's not because the people do not think that that's important. It's sometimes it's a matter of choice. It's a matter of using the resources, and also more importantly, it's a misconception. We'll show that in the next few slides. That is a misconception, highly accepted, but it's a misconception that does not happen necessarily that way. Okay? Performance sport, and I said before, this is a really complex relationship. For the most part, is that most governments, most countries across the world, and particularly, in high developed economies, in the Western world, but also, and probably across the world, they do invest significantly amount of money in developing high performance sport. So the question is it that more important to develop athletes? Why is that developing high performance athletes, it's so relevant for many, governments across the world at the expense of preparing policies or putting resources in making populations more physically active? Well, the reason why governments across the world invest in high performance sport is because it's understood that it contributes to promote mass participation. As I was just mentioned before, is this misconceptions that the notions of having high performance athletes will sort of like magically, create this imitation effect. There are more people active in a given society, in a given country. Okay. Another reason is why governments invest in high performance sport is because it creates this notion of that people feel good about. What we don't know is that there's no really empirical evidence that sustain that because we have athletes, we can necessarily will become people more active. If that happens, the effect is very short. Okay. There's good examples about failing attempts of trying to pursue this idea. One of the perhaps well-known examples was the London 2012 Summer Olympics. One of the legacies that the organizing committee was, proposing was that by the end of the game, there were going to be about 1 million people, citizens of London, they will be more physically active. In other words, it's not that the numbers will increase in 1 more million, but those who were already active, it will become, they will increase the numbers of days that they were, physically active, for 1 day to 2 days or up to 3 days. Now that, as the time was getting closer to the end of the game, the London organizing committee, they have to drop that idea, that legacy, because they realized that the first, it was very difficult to measure, and second, not because they were organizers of the Olympic Games, people were necessarily becoming more physically active. Another example, okay, is perhaps the United States. The United States, it's a nation that in most sports, right, domestically and internationally, does very well, okay? However, the levels of obesity of the population has been significantly increased over the past 15 years. Obesity not only in the adult population, but also obesity in the children population. So that tells us that how is that happen that in a country in which sport is so celebrated, in which you have so many heroes, athletes, right? The population is becoming more obese because it's becoming more sedentary and not necessarily more physically active. So, what we can conclude here is that this idea that the top athletes create mass participations is sort of like, a faulty idea that is actually not proven to be necessarily true. So, this is one of the models, you can see there the change of arrows on the left of the screen is what we call the virtuous cycle of sport. It basically illustrates what I was previously mentioned, right? Which is elite athletes basically naturally will, through the imitations effects, it will increase people's participations. Because people participate more, you will have a wider pool of participants, therefore you have more people in which you can select your future elite athletes. So you have this sort of like cycle, right, that constantly it creates its own feedback and produces more athletes. That is what has been challenged in the literature. That is not necessarily what happens in real life. Similarly, these notions of the double pyramid theory, which is, I assume that for those of you who are in some role of sport administration, you have probably, and that most people believe that because we have a large mass of people, you sort of like, naturally you will become those individuals who will perform well in the global arena in sport. Or the opposite, because you have, individuals who perform well, those will create that imitations effect that I was just previously mentioned, and will increase the mass of participants. Neither one, the virtuous cycles of sport, the double pyramid theory, actually happens to be true. The process of developing high-performance athletes and the process of balancing simultaneously, right, mass sport and elite sport is very complex. There's some empirical evidence that actually, which is involves basically two activities. One is a cross-country ski, and another one is that they do shooting with rifle, to a certain target. So this is a very popular sport in Norway. The Norwegian biathlon federations, they did a study about 15 years ago in which they were trying to connect trying to look for empirical evidence if the numbers of people who were participating in a race, were connected to the numbers of medals that that federations were achieved in international contests that particular year. And if you can see there in that table, the correlation was high, was 7.46 between medals and mass rate. That is telling us that yes, because you have numbers of people that actually participate in a massive race, that correlates with the numbers of medals. They did the correlations between the top 15 athletes from Norway at the world level, and they correlate with the same, variables. One was the numbers of people who were part of the biathlon in Norway, and in the other, the number of people who were registered in a particular, mass race. So all of these correlations were above, or almost about 0.6 and higher. So this is actually, it provides some evidence that some relationship exists. However, the same author from these studies, they concluded that it is not believed that elite sport create mass sport per se. Elite sport may indirectly generate mass sport. They explain in that particular article that there's other factors that also you have to take in consideration. So this sort of like one cause effect that because you have an elite athlete, you have more mass participants is not necessarily true. There's many other variables that might intervene. For example, the amount of funding, the promotions, the type of, the popularity of the sport, and there were many other factors that also you have to take into account. So, this model that I'm presenting here is essentially, it illustrates, and perhaps some of you might be familiar with this model. This is known as the SPLIS model. The SPLIS model stands for Sport Policy Leading to International Sport Success. Okay, this model was developed by a group of researchers in Belgium, right, about probably 15 years ago. And basically what it does is that it illustrates or it identifies the elements that you require, as an organization, as a region, or as a country, in order to, if you want to develop a successful high performance sport program. It's not focused on the mass of participants. It's focused only on the high performance. As we will see, you can see there at the bottom of that sort of like, rocket, you can see there that the pillar number 3, what they call it the initiations, it's important to have, a mass of participants, which is, those participants, either they might come at the school level or at the recreational level. So this model, as I said, which is not necessarily related, does not explain mass and elite sport, it shows you the complexity of developing of the factor and variables that involve the developing of high performance sport, right? From scientific research, from international competitions, from having adequate coaching, from having training facilities, etc., etc. So let's move now to the case study. The case study that I just want to mention and I want to illustrate, and I'll show you sort of like, to what extent in this case study, elements that is needed to develop master sport actually occur or not occur. By the same token, to what extent elements that we need in order to develop a sport performance programs, it really occurs or does not occur. Okay, so this case study was done probably about 10 years ago. We did it with a colleague, from Salem State University. It's a university which is close to Boston, okay? And we interview pretty much and we follow for about a year the practices, that happens, in the Department of Parks and Recreation in New York City, okay? So specifically, we were focusing on their swimming program. Okay. So what the first thing that before we were trying to understand and trying to identify what were the elements that really matters in order to create a balanced policy that support mass participation and elite sport. Let me first explain to you like the model that it was developed actually by my colleague, Smolyanov, Peter Smolyanov, that's professor from Salem State University, in 2008 with his colleague, Dave Safety, right? So basically the model which is called the integrated math and high performance sport, presents three big levels, right? One is the macro level, the foundations, the meso level, and the micro level. The macro level actually has two parts. Basically, is right? If you notice from the previous model that we showed in the previous slide, I didn't mention, but also the pillar, they were calling pillar, not levels. The pillar number one from that model was funding. So for any program, right, that is going to be developed at the city level, provincial level, or a national level that aims to achieve both objectives, the first thing that administrators need to say, do we have the resources? Do we have the funding? Right? And because most likely the resources are scarce, right? And the needs are unlimited, people make decisions, right? Sometimes the resources are not possible to do what the program wants you to do, therefore there are certain decisions, and some of the programs, whether the elite sport or the mass sport, is going to be affected by those decisions. So these modules, I said, has include three levels. The macro levels include the balance and integrated funding. The level number 2 is partnership with supporting agencies. The level number 3 is the provisions of education and scientific support. Level number 4 is having an adequate system of competitions. Level number 5 is having adequate facilities, training centers, and where the athletes can train. And level number 6 is talent identification. Try to understand who are those who will have the potential to succeed in sport. And level number 7 is to provide advanced support for those who have reached at that level, right? As we know, athletes are a special individual in the whole sense, right? In the sense that their needs are not the same as the needs of the non-athletes, because they require more specific medical, support, or they require, more financial support to supply all their demands and needs in order to achieve their competition goals. So let's talk a little bit about some of the premises about this module, okay, the integrated mass and high performance sport. Okay, one of the premises for this module is that it's based on existing ideas of previous models in high performance sport. So this model was not made from scratch, right? If you really dig in the literature of high performance sports, you can pretty much go back to the last 30 years, right? Or even 40 years, in which there's a substantial amount of literature in which they propose, what are the factors that really intervene when you want to produce high-performance athletes, but also what are the factors that you need in order to provide services and programs for the populations, as a whole. Okay, most of those models actually are being incorporated from knowledge that has been developed from Western and Eastern, existing models, right? Specifically in the idea of Eastern countries, it's important to mention here, the former Soviet Union, the former socialist countries, they were pioneers to a certain extent in developing very sophisticated model of training, right? And put significant amount of resources into develop athletes that were competing. The reasons, they were obviously, this is during the time of the Cold War, in which sport was an instrument to show the supremacy of one idea over the other idea. So the East was competing with the West. One way of competition was through competition in sport. So it's important to understand that many of those countries actually were developed from the Eastern European countries, the former German Democratic Republic, Soviet Union, countries like Hungary, Bulgaria, etc. Right? And in the West, you have countries like Australia, the United States, England, etc. And of course, Germany as well. Another important aspect from this model is that this is an heuristic tool. And what is an heuristic tool? It's basically, it's a model, that helps to explain. It's not necessarily that it tells us that this is, if you follow this model letter, by the letter, you necessarily is going to achieve the results. It's more an explanation model of what does involve in order to achieve those, balanced, idea of achieving mass sport and high performance sport. It's a methodical, the models, as you remember in the slide that I mentioned previously, it shows that it goes from bottom up, okay, from the level number 7, from level number 1 all the way to level number 7, okay? So each level follows a progression from bottom up. And one key concept here is integration. Integration is what makes these models a little bit different to the previous models. And because Smolinos, they talk about integration. They believe that integrating, the levels of services, right, you can maximize the effort, right? So, for example, training center, it's so expensive to develop a training center. So, what does it mean integration? Integration, it means that can a training center be located in a university, right? So, the training center not only can serve to train those athletes that are, require a specific training and a specific facilities, but also the same training center would be used by a larger population that are not necessarily, high performance athletes. That's an example of how integrate effort, right? You might be able to maximize the benefit of a sport, and for that, with that strategy, you might be actually targeting not only elite athletes, but also you're targeting regular individuals who are just looking to be active physically and have a good life, right? So the key concept in this model is integration. To what extent each of these factors that I was showing in the previous slide actually are integrated, okay, with other organizations in the society, but also to what extent each level within this model is integrated, between the levels vertically and horizontally as well. Okay, so that is one key concept that is pretty much developed from the Eastern concept of models of high performance sport, in which it was important not only to develop top athletes, but it was important to provide programs to become a population more physically active and at the end trying to achieve the goal, a more healthy population. Okay, before I talk about the specific aspect of this swimming program in New York City, let me talk just one or two things about key issues of the sport policy in the United States, because the program that I'm going to talk about is about specific program in New York, a swimming program in New York, which is, you will see that it's significantly large, right? Some of the policy issues in sport in the United States, you will be surprised about this if you don't know, right? But it's the first thing is that there's an absence of a single entity in charge of a sport. I assume that in India, and I'm pretty sure there is, right? There is a governmental agency, right? That rules, that controls, that support, and also provide funding for sport, for the national teams, for all of the entities, and one of the roles is to promote sport, but also support strategies that go with this, that related to sport. In the United States, that agency does not exist, right? The second aspect important is that there's not a strategic goal. So the United States does not have a national plan of sport development. Interesting, right? Because how is that? A country that performs so well, international, Olympics, World Championship, not in cricket, of course, right? But in many sports they do very well. How is that they don't have, a plan? Well, that goes totally against what other countries are doing. UK, Canada, Australia, India, I'm pretty sure, right? China, Japan, all of major campaigns within the Olympic movement, they do have a strategy, right? In order to achieve more medals, in order to increase their showcase in this, world competition. Another important aspect, is that in the United States, as different from many other countries, the administration of the sport is decentralized, right? And most countries have some level of centralization. I assume that, and I don't know the case of India very well, but I assume that in India, because it's such a large country, right, they might have some level of decentralization world dollars, right, in order for other organizations, let's say in a school, a university, a private organization, they can perhaps apply and maybe get a portion of the funding. Any building that you build today, it might cost more than $100 million. So the idea is that the city will not pay the full amount of that particular, project, but it will pay a partial level. The concept is that the other remaining cost, it will be paid for the other. That is an example of integration. So the city does pretty well in terms of partnership. They have a good reach out, right? You can see here the governor of the state of New York, right? Talking about the benefits of swimming. This is a big thing, right? Because swimming is not seen as a something related to sport, related to performance, or related to medals. It's something related to safety, but also related to health and well-being, right? So there's a big push about that this program, needs to be not only promoted, but actually needs to be maximized in terms of their uses, in terms of the way that this effort can be integrated with other organizations. Following with this idea of partnership, I mentioned this one. This is an example of how the city partnered with the state parks. That's another organization, but that's at the state level, which is, the state parks provide the instructions, sort of like, the people from the city, right, or lifeguard, right, or participants can be part of this training instruction. So this is an example of, joint venture, integrations of effort. State University of New York collaborate with schools, right, to increase their learning to swim opportunity. In other words, the university goes out there to the community, and try to promote, swimming as a sport, not only for safety reasons, but also for health, and well-being reasons as well. So there is examples in which, the departments of parks and recreation from New York really does a good reach out from different organizations throughout the city to increase their efforts, to increase the reach out of what they do. Level three, to what extent, the levels of educations, that exist, it really benefits this particular program. Well, all of the coaches that are part of this swim program within the Department of Parks and Recreation in the city of New York, they have to be certified. They have to be certified. So there's a partnership here with the Department of Education, with the State Department of Education. So the Departments of Parks and Recs, they team up with the Departments of Education, and they provide certifications and training for all the coaches, and the personnel that works and provides services throughout the city and also throughout the state. So there is some level of integration here. The level 4, which is the system of competition, right? The swimming programs, as a part of the departments of parks and recreations, they do provide, they do have, a competition system, right? This is for individuals, children, age 6 to 18, that they demonstrate that they're above the average, right? If they're able to swim certain distance, with a good technique, they might be invited to participate. There's a total of 12 teams. Those teams, they not only compete among them, right? Because all those teams are supported by the same department. So, but also those teams actually participate in another competition within the city and in the nearer, communities, but not necessarily part of the departments of Parks and Recreation. So, for example, they might be on the private clubs that actually participate in those swimming meets. So they do have a system of competitions. However, that system of competition is not necessarily for high caliber athletes. That system of competition is mostly made for individuals who want to experience the competitions, but not necessarily. If you have a high talented swimmer, right, which is typically in swimming, the performance occurs really at a very early age, right? The city might not have the conditions, the coaching level to really support that person. That person might have to migrate to another club, another organization to really get the training he or she needs in order to achieve his goal. The next level is training centers. I mentioned before, training centers and facilities is one of the things that the city is not short. Definitely is not short. I mentioned at the beginning there's 91 swimming pools in New York. Of those 91, there are about 50% that are follow the standards to become training centers. So I was reading a report that talks about all of these facilities, and actually in New York, and not necessarily if you're an athlete or a high competitive athlete, but if you're just a regular person, you have a swimming pool, within 20 to 25-minute walk. So depending on where you are, so you can see that those 91 pools are strategically located that you can be anywhere, right, in the city, which is a pretty large city, right, about 9 million people. You can have a swimming pool close to you, about 25 minutes walk. So in terms of training centers, in terms of facilities, the city does extremely well, okay? But as I mentioned before, even though those facilities are state of the art, most of the usage for that is for the common people, for the people who are looking goals of health, well-being, become physically active, and so forth. Not necessarily high performance athletes. Next level is talent development.